I have two core memories from 8th grade that I just can't shake. That when I was in 8th grade, you go to high school or you're getting ready to go to high school, and the teachers did their very best to freak us out. And man, it worked because, and this wasn't even intended on their part, I remember they were giving us a tour a few months before the end of school of the high school. And we're in the auditorium, which is probably about this big, and we're over here, and there's a group of high school girls over there. And something was happening. The volume, the cacophony, begins to pick up, and then you hear that there's some anger. Then you hear some choice words used, and the fingernails, the hair pulling, and the fists started going hard. So there's a group of 8th graders who are like this, and then there's a group of teenage girls over there going hard at it, just fighting, fist fight, brutal stuff. And here's what our guide does. Our guide says, oh yeah, that happens sometimes. Let's go this way. And I'm like, that happens sometimes? Is it gonna happen this time? Is somebody coming for me right now? And so I just remember being completely freaked out, like, oh my gosh, what is gonna happen when I get to this fabled world called high school? Of course, as the 90s, things were different. But the other thing from core memory of 8th grade was when my buddy Josh, who had the biggest crush on Jessica for months, and he had never really talked to her at all, but there we were, basketball practice just ended, we're all standing outside waiting for our rides to show up, and there's Jessica. And kind of like Spinks from The Sandlot with Wendy Peppercorn, he sees her and he's like, oh, I can't help myself. He didn't tell any of us. He just goes right up to her and he says, hey, Jessica, would you like to be my girlfriend? And I will never forget her response because it was so matter of fact. It was like there's a law to the universe, right? Things go down. Like on Earth, gravity exists. You're not being controversial for saying that, right? You're saying gravity, like there are laws to the universe, like vegetables don't belong in coffee drinks. Hence, pumpkin spice, the devil's drink, right? Like who's like, oh, hey, St. Patrick's Day is coming up. Let's do a potato spice latte for the Irish. Sounds disgusting, right? Because it's a law, you don't put vegetables in your drinks. All right, there are some things that are just realities in this world, and she so coldly does this to Josh. She goes, huh. And I quote, when pigs fly. And Josh was so sad for like 20 minutes. And then he was pretty much over. He's like, well, okay, that wasn't gonna work out. But of course, we all have that desire deep down to be wanted by somebody, to be desired by somebody for something, because that's just a core part of humanity. In fact, some of our favorite stories are stories of people that go from nothing to something. Neo from The Matrix, he's just working this, boring cubicle, computery job thing, and then all of a sudden, he is the chosen one. Or, this girl that grows up in Appalachia that means nothing to anybody except for she becomes the Mockingjay. Or this little boy that grows up on Tatooine. You get the idea. We love these stories. We hunger and we thirst for these stories that let us know that even if we feel like we're a nobody, the reality is that someday you could be desired, you could be somebody. And we crave that stuff. And if we don't find it in our own lives, we'll find ways of trying to create it. And so we push ourselves to be better than other people, or we change the way we talk so that we can fit in and be more desired. We cut calories so that we can look a particular way so that we can be desired. And there's nothing wrong with that. God created us in that way to be people who want to be wanted. That's a good thing. But at the same time, we can see how quickly and how easily that can go sideways. You might think this is a young person's game, but I'll tell you what, the more and more retired people I talk to about this is, thanks, Trisha. This is something that you go through later on in life too, isn't it? Because you spend your life working and serving and doing the things that you do professionally, and then you finally get to that point to where you say, I quit, I'm done. And you're like, wait a second. But what good am I? What use am I? It's no longer like my job that tells me who I am or what I do, but I got all this free time and my kids are growing up and they don't need me the same way. And I'm wondering, am I still wanted? If you've lived any period of time, you've gone through this in some way, shape, or form. And in fact, as you might guess, there are rhythms to life where you continually will be finding yourself asking this question. And so what I want to poke at is this idea of, are you wanted around the table? We're going to talk about this guy that's in the Old Testament, but I want to set it up for you. First, there's a few kings involved, really just two. There's King Saul, and then his son, Jonathan. Jonathan's best friend is David. You probably have heard of David before, the guy that killed Goliath. He becomes kind of the iconic king in the Old Testament. David is there. He's kind of going to be the next king, but he's not the next king yet. So Saul and Jonathan are off fighting a battle. And in this battle, both of them die. And on one hand, David is a little, he's sad about it, of course, but he also knows that he's been waiting for Saul to step down for quite some time. But he's really mournful of Jonathan, his best friend, having died. And so it's a sad moment for David as well. But in the kingdom, you know that if you know anything about how monarchies work, is that when the king dies, anybody who has any kind of claim to the throne or desire for the throne, the door hath been cracked open. So all you have to do is take it for yourself. And the easiest way, the way you start doing that, is making sure anybody else who sees that door that's cracked open knows that that's not an option for them. So anybody who's a descendant of Saul or Jonathan needs to be killed that fast. Like you go at the family immediately when this whole Game of Thrones kind of stuff starts happening. And that's exactly what we see begin to happen. You see Saul and Jonathan both die, and then eventually we know David is going to become the king. But there's a few moments there of complete and utter chaos. And that's where we get to be introduced to our friend with a crazy name, at least by our standards. Let me see if I can get it right the first time. Mephibosheth. Mephibosheth. Yeah, I've been practicing this all week. And then my wife and I are sitting down at dinner. This is true. Last night, talking about, what's going on in church tomorrow, this, that, the other. What are you teaching? I'm teaching on this guy, my wife, who's over in the kids ministry right now. I forget his name. It's a crazy name. Starts with an M. Has this foot thing. I said, Mephibosheth? She's like, oh yeah, that's the guy. I said, I've been in ministry for well over 20 years. I've taught so many lessons to middle schoolers, high schoolers, college kids, adults, sermons, all of this stuff, a lot. And never once have I ever preached on Mephibosheth. However, on the same Sunday, we are now doing at the same exact, what are the odds of this? They're not zero, obviously, but they're not terribly high. So the kids, I asked, well, what are you guys doing for your service? And they said, we're making a cheer for Mephibosheth. And I said, that's cool. We're not going to do that in the adult room. So rest assured, just a sermon today. So Mephibosheth is there. He's 5 years old. And he's got this caretaker because his dad is off fighting a war. And the moment she hears that Saul and Jonathan die, what does she do? She freaks out because it's not just Mephibosheth that his life is on the line. It's hers too. She's a part of the house of Saul. Even if she's just a servant, she's going to get caught up and killed in this whole thing as well. So she grabs Mephibosheth and starts grabbing, looking around. She's freaking out. And in the process, in the chaos of what's going on, uncertainty in that moment, Mephibosheth's feet hit the ground and are crushed. Don't know exactly how, but there's something like nerve damage, broken bones, all sorts of stuff. So not only can he not walk or run in the getaway, but he actually becomes crippled for life from that moment right there. It's in that place that he finds himself now viewed as not just the child of this king, where you're certain people are coming after you, because that's what you would assume would happen in ancient society. but you can't get away if you want to. And so a year goes by in hiding, lying low, living in the shadows. 2 years. 20 years go by. David, during that time, has been very successful as a king. In fact, here's what it says in 2 Samuel chapter 8. It says, David reigned over all Israel, doing what was just and right for all his people. Then David asked, is anyone still left from the house of Saul? So this is 20 years after they had died. He has been king. He's been doing great things. Is there anybody left from the house of Saul whom I can show, kingly kindness toward? And again, this is what kings do. They ask, hey, where are the people that still have a claim to the throne? I want to eradicate them. So he puts that out there. Siba, a guy who knows, who's actually a steward of Saul's stuff, the deceased king, the king asked, is there no one still alive from the house of Saul to whom I can show God's kindness? Sounds nice and innocent. Of course, people around him, maybe some of them believe that he actually wants to be kind. Maybe some of them think that, he wants to off him because that's what kings do. Siba answers the king, there's still a son of Jonathan. He's lame in both feet. Where is he? The king asked. So David finds out where he's at, sends his soldiers to go to Mephibosheth's house. And they knock on the door. He sees who it is, and his heart just sinks because it's been 20 years. He's been waiting for somebody to come and finish what he knows they meant to finish long ago. And they say, Mephibosheth, yep, that's me. Come with me. The king wants to see you and talk to you. Okay. So he gets up, goes all the way to Jerusalem. He's probably never been there his entire life. He's heard about it. He doesn't live that far away from it, but it's the place he knows he does not want to be because of what he knows is waiting there for him. So he sees the temple and its grandeur and enters into the palace, and he goes before the king to pay him honor. When he walks in, or actually doesn't walk in, when he gets inside, David says, Mephibosheth. And Mephibosheth hears that, and he's like, that didn't sound angry. Didn't sound like death. That sounded different. That's not what I expected. So he replied, at your service. And everything hinges on what happens next. David said, don't be afraid, for I will surely show you kindness for the sake of your father, Jonathan. I will restore to you all the land that belonged to your grandfather Saul, and you will always eat at my table. And nobody would have really given David a hard time had he just chopped his head off right there. That's just what you would expect. It consolidates power, you make more money, it's less trouble. After all, I don't know if you know this, but ancient Israel had not passed the Americans with Disabilities Act yet. So Israel was not ADA compliant, meaning it was rather difficult for somebody like him to be treated as anything other than a nuisance. And culturally, people would make moral value statements based off of somebody's physical condition. You must be a bad person because these things have happened. We kind of get that, right? And so here is this guy who's crippled, who deserves nothing, goes into the king's house and is completely reconnected and restored into the lineage of being royal all over again. So he goes from fear to feeling the sense of dignity. And like anybody who has heard something that almost sounds too good to be true, you get the winning lotto ticket and you look at the numbers and you check them 5 more times over the next day to make sure, do these match up? He's like, hold on, I don't know that I heard you right because this doesn't sound right. Here's his response. Mephibosheth bowed down and said, what is your servant that you should notice a dead dog like me? That's what he thinks of himself. How is this anything but a cruel joke? That's the best he can come up with because this is how he's been talked to. This is how he's been living his entire life. And he's taken that identity of the people that the people have assigned to him rather than remaining in who he was, which is a person of royalty, which is a person who should be favored by the nation simply because he is a child of the king, the descendant of the king. How often do we do this to ourselves? Where we convince ourselves that you're not good enough, or you're too much, or that nobody's gonna like you, or that you're not, you don't belong here, you don't belong anywhere. And you might have been told these things so much that at some point in time, you started just believing them. And so many times I see people that come into church and they're like, yeah, this is kind of like the last place I ever expected myself to be, because they know, or because they bought into what their parents said about them, or what their grandparents did, or the way that something happened in their life. And it doesn't have to necessarily be negative things, though, either, that give us identities that we choose to live within. Somebody could say, oh, you know, that Joe, he's always a success. Oh, it just comes so natural to her. Golden couple, they're perfect. There's nothing wrong. And you can think, the more, you know, identity-giving compliments pile up on your plate, the more you feel like you have an image that you now have to protect. Oh, I can't be flawed because I'm the perfect child. I cannot have made a mistake because everybody says that I'm flawless. And now you have to start hiding. Whatever identities come our way, whether they are negative, whether they might seem positive in that moment, you know you are in trouble. Here's the yellow flag, maybe red flag. The moment that you start telling yourself the same stories that the people around you are telling. When you start believing what they're saying about you and before what God says about you, before your identity as a child of God, as we just sang out, is known deep down, then you know you're starting to build something on sand, not on solid ground. And it's gonna topple over sooner than later. And so David speaks these words over Mephibosheth. He says, I'm gonna give you this dignity. I'm gonna restore you back to your rightful place. But he does, so he speaks these words, and speaking those words, those are good, but that's not enough. You can't just stay there. He gives him a new reality. So the king summoned Ziba, Saul's steward, and said to him, I've given you the master's grandson, your master's grandson, everything that belonged to Saul and his family. You and your sons and your servants are to farm the land for him, bring in the crops, so that your master's grandson may be provided for. And Mephibosheth, grandson of your master, will always eat at my table. Here's how the story ends. Mephibosheth lived in Jerusalem, meaning he packed up and he moved. That's a pretty good place to live when you have the favor of the king, because he always ate at the king's table. He was lame in both feet. And that last part sounds a little weird, but here's how I like to think of it. Healing, especially when we talk about the Bible, especially if you're going through the miracles of Jesus, we often think healing looks like something that happens on the outside. And I get that. There's certainly truth to that. But healing is not always on the outside. Mephibosheth could not, it does not say here, that he stood up and started dancing through the streets and pranced around all of Jerusalem. It doesn't say that. His feet still didn't work, yet the man was healed. You just couldn't see. It was in his identity. And if you don't think that's any less of a miracle, then you need to rethink what a miracle actually is. Because what happens to him is that he goes from somebody who is completely unwanted, living in hiding, to somebody who is significant and has value. And it's all because of what the king told him. And if we can remember that, then what you need to know is that you too, in the same way that he was chosen, you too have been chosen. Chosen by God. You're chosen by the king. and you can eat at the table. And trust me when I say the King, your Father in heaven, knows you better than you know yourself. Because before you had any awareness whatsoever, you were a thought, an idea, a spark in the life of God. When we understand that that is who we are, that God chooses us, well, shoot, I want to sit at that table. I want to pull up a chair. I want to eat, and I want to talk to that God. In our lives, we often think very exclusionary. We think that relationships are kind of zero-sum, right? Like, I chose the woman who would become my wife. This woman that would become my wife chose me. We came together, got married, and we have 3 kids, and look at us go, right? Like we think it's just the two of us, and that's true. In human relationships, you cannot know everybody. You can't even know everybody in this church that well. You can know a few, right? In human relationships, our capacity is pretty low, but when we think of God's capacity is not down on the ground, low, incapable of loving dearly and knowing deeply each one of us. And God invites us to the table. Everything changes around God's table, which means that God's table is not going to look like the tables that most people set up here in America, because we're going to have people at God's table that sit on the left politically and people that sit on the right politically. We're going to have CEOs with high-paying jobs and the unemployed sitting together. We're going to have perfectionists and addicts sitting together. We're going to have people that you can't stand around that table. I know. I don't like that either. This is not my message. This is God's message, okay? I'm just telling you what I'm pretty sure is the case. See, the moment that we forget that it's not just me and my ideas, it's not just what I bring to this, but rather it's other people as well. And just because somebody is different than you does not mean that they're bad. It does not mean that they're wrong. It does not mean that they are evil. And there are so many people that want to divide us up because we're a lot easier to control when we're divided, aren't we? There's so many people that want to divvy us up like that, but God says, no. Everyone belongs at this table. Everyone gets a seat. There's no prerequisites for what color of hair you have. There's no prerequisites for any of this stuff. You have a seat at God's table. And so when we walk around and live our lives asking that question, am I wanted? Am I wanted? The answer is absolutely, you are wanted at God's table. And we hear that and we say, yes, that's great. That's what I want church to be. I hope that's kind of where you're at, because that's what I want. That's what I think church is. However, the reality is that this is just words. It's a sermon in a church. It's what you do from here. It's where you go from here with what God is doing in your life right now that matters. Because we can hear this stuff and say, wouldn't this world be so much better if we were able to sit together? Yes. So, in the last week, my question for you, when did you spend time with somebody that you might not normally spend time with? Could be popping into an office, could be grabbing a cup of coffee, lunch, breakfast, having them over for a meal. Maybe it's happening in your life. Maybe it's intentional, maybe you were busy and all that, but here's what I want to put to you. This is not an option for those of us that follow Jesus. We don't get to pick and choose who we're going to love well. We don't get to pick and choose who we think is chosen to be around that table, because God already did that. It's filled with people just like you. It's filled with people just like me. And it's filled with people completely different than you and completely different than me as well. And this is really, really hard because we like to be comfortable. But it's in the tension when you're sitting here and that person is sitting there. It's in that tension of not knowing everything that you begin to discover something. That there's a connection, there's laughter, and that there is an actual shared dignity that you both have. And the desire for a good life that you both have. And that through that, in that situation, perhaps this world could get a little bit better. Perhaps things could be a little bit more smooth because we're not so worried about only having healthy people. We can have sick around too. We're not so worried about having all the successes. We can have dinner with the failures. We're not so worried about having all the lovers around because we can embrace the haters too. The doubters, the super spiritual. There is no us and them. If you are in Jesus, there is no us and those people. Rather, there's just you and me. And when you learn to be able to say that, when you are out there in the rest of the community, when you're in the cul-de-sac, when you're in with your people, your friends, your neighbors, whether they go to church, whether they like church, whether they like Jesus, whether they like you or not. When you understand what connects me is that this person that I'm talking to in any given moment was chosen by God to sit at God's table. Now, I know we have a shared humanity, whether I agree with them or not. And if this is something that feels true, I just want you to know this is straight from the Bible. This is not my idea. If it was my idea, I'd be saying something else. Hang out with people that you like, forget the rest of them, because I think I'm right about a lot of things. I think you guys probably think you're right about a lot of things too. And we're just a community of people who are right. Forget all the other people, man. We're the good ones. We're the ones that got it right. Hold up. Again, you see the problem here, right? The moment we start thinking that our ideas are the only ideas, you're allowed to be convinced that your ideas are the best. That's fine. That's fine. What's that look like around the table, though? That's my question. What's it look like to carry your conviction, to carry the love that you have when you walk in the way of Jesus into situations where you're with people who are not on the same side as you? Followers of Jesus are not given the option to choose who does or who does not belong. Your identity is found first in what the King says about you, and then you live your life out of that. That's what I love about the story of Mephibosheth, is that his whole life is turned upside down because of, David in that story. And of course, we find these parallels right into Jesus, where we know that when Jesus speaks a word, it changes everything. That's what we get to be invited into as a community of Jesus followers. So this means a couple things. Start recognizing the voices around you. The voices that are speaking truths over you. And those truths might feel good. Oh, look at you go. Wow. Oh, Savior of the family. Lover. Best person I've ever met. That's fine. That's great. Take that to heart, no doubt. That's not who you are. You are not as good as the people who love the best, right? The top 10%. Cut that off. Okay. You're also not as bad as the worst, the people that just, no matter what, he walks on the right side of the road, I hate him. Like, whatever it is, you cannot do it right. Okay, you can take those away too. When we even ourselves out and we learn what voices we can trust and listen to, we start by listening to the voice of your Father in heaven. It says you are loved, you are accepted, you've been bought, you've been paid for, you are redeemed, and you now get to live a life free of all hindrances, of all sin, of all guilt, of all shame. You get to live freely in that. And then you look around and you say, okay, I know what God says about me. I want to be a part of a community that reinforces that. It's exactly what the church tries to do, right? Where we're learning how to deprogram the old voices, the old things that we have learned, and to start paying attention and listening to what God would have us do. So we start by recognizing the voices. We learn to not listen to the voices that lead us away from God. And if that's you today, if maybe you're here and you're thinking, man, I've been listening to the wrong voices for a long time. The good news is your Father invites you to come back Your Father always invites you to come back and find him. Pull up a chair, grab a seat. There is no shame in coming back to the Father. And for those of us that walk in the way of Jesus, challenge this week. And this is going to be an ongoing thing, so get used to this. Find somebody who you might not normally connect with. Find somebody who on paper, if somebody knew you and knew that other person, somebody look at you and say, this is weird. Why are you two talking? Like, this doesn't make as much sense to me. And have that conversation. It could be over lunch, coffee. It could just be swing by and setting up a time to connect. But start by embodying the presence of God right where God has you. We do work with this conviction that God is already working. You don't have to go out and try to find it. You're already living in a space that God wants to move in powerful ways. So the question I have for you is, when you look around, when you use your imagination, who is this? And where is that person? And how can you connect with them? Not with a big agenda, other than to say, I just want to hear your story. I want to know a little bit more about you so I can better understand where you're coming from. It's not about even me or being understood. It's just about listening patiently, thoughtfully, lovingly. And then continuing to pray to say, God, would you show me how to love this person well in this moment, over the next week, over the next month. I don't know about you, but it feels like the world needs this kind of a mission. We need, just as much as ever, I'd say, people that are willing to pull up a chair to the table, to say, I know that you got baggage. I know you come from a different place. I know that we're probably not going to agree on X, Y, and Z. I don't really care. I just want to have a meal with you. I want to spend some time together. That's my agenda. What if that's what we were known as? A community of people that lived in that kind of a way, so that when the world goes nuts, which it always will, always has, always will, when the world goes crazy and people lose their minds and forget who they are, you can remind yourself of who you are and what your Father in heaven has called you to do at the table. Let's pray. Father, we're grateful for David in this story of Mephibosheth. Lord, the challenge that you put before us of being people who are not so preoccupied in what we can do or what we even should do, but rather we look to you and we say, what are you inviting us into? Lord, would you remind us that we are not just the chosen people that attended church on this day, the 21st of September, but rather that you look at the world and say, yes. God so loved the world. Remind us of that today. Remind us of that in this moment. And would you impress on us the names and the faces of the people, that you would have us go out from here and love with reckless abandon, and to show kindness and peace and grace toward, not because of what they deserve, but because of who you are. Or that we can be a community of people who help others to find you, even in times of stress and uncertainty. Lord, I thank you for being God who loves us dearly, and ask your blessing as we go on from here to do your will here in Phoenix, Paradise Valley, Scottsdale, as it is in heaven.